Mingalaba, for any Burmese language speakers tuning in today, we wanted to let you know that our Better Burma mission has launched 3 Burmese language podcasts: Myanmar Revolutionary Tales, Dark Era of Burma, and Myanmar Peace, Women, and Security. These programs can be found on our website as well as on any of your preferred podcast platforms. We invite you to take a listen. But for now, let's get on with this episode.
And welcome back. I'm joined today by a returning guest, Kenneth Wong, translator, writer, and a Myanmar language instructor. And last time we spoke more about the linguistics of the Burmese language and various actors' attempts to portray Burmese in cinema. But today, Kenneth is going to be sharing his experiences from his first trip to Thailand and the surprisingly large Myanmar community and strong Myanmar cultural imprint that can be found in cities like Chiang Mai and Mae Sot, which I'm sure is going to be a very illuminating discussion. So, Kenneth, thank you very much for coming back. And even if our guests maybe don't remember you, do you want to sort of be a little bit more broad in introducing yourself?
Of course. Thank you very much for having me back. Glad to be back here. My name is Kenneth Wong. I was born and raised in Yangon, right in the heart of downtown Yangon. But I immigrated to the U.S. about 35 years ago. So I can now just honestly say that San Francisco is my home now. But of course, I have a lot of strong emotional ties to Burma. I teach Burmese language at UC Berkeley, and I often translate contemporary Burmese poetry and short stories into English. This year, for the very first time, I went to Thailand because many of the people that I wanted to see, as it turns out, have actually fled across the border and have now sought safety and shelter in places like Mae Sot and Chiang Mai. So it made more sense for me to spend my vacation in Thailand. So that's what brought me to Thailand.
Excellent. And so let's talk about that, because the image that we have of Thailand, of course, is one that's been crafted largely by the Thai government and Thai sort of, let's say, PR of a single Thai country with a single Thai culture and a single Thai identity. Is that what you have experienced?
I think I was definitely impressed by how advanced some of the transportation systems are, like the SkyTrain system in Bangkok, the BTS system, and how convenient it is, and how closely it mirrors to some of the high benchmarks that we think of, like the Japanese train systems and things like that. So, and also, I also recognize the fact that, the experience that you would get typically as a tourist, as an American tourist in my case, is the carefully crafted, curated experience that the Thai government wanted you to have. So you would see the wonderful, amazing mosaic facades of Wat Po and the Grand Palace, and you would be mesmerized by the spicy but still delicious Thai food and things like that. But on the other hand, I have learned, I put myself through 5 to 6 months of basic Thai speaking learning so that I could communicate with Thai people better. And as a result of that, it seems to me like I also start to see the inequality in the Thai society. Right underneath the SkyTrain overpasses, for example, you could actually see mothers and sons begging for loose change and things like that. And right by passing by them are people who are very well dressed and who are very wealthy, tourists including them. You start to see pockets of inequality, and also because I was able to speak basic Thai with taxi drivers and things like that, it feels like I get a different access to a different level of the culture and the experience.
I just want to, as a curiosity, you said you spent some months preparing Thai language skills so that you would be able to communicate when you were there. Um, what methodology are you using, just on a personal curiosity point?
Well, I bought some books from Tuttle Publishing, and I also realized that I have to create an immersive environment, even though I was in America. So one of the things that I did is I changed my default audio option in Netflix to Thai. So, for
Mm,
example, when I watch my favorite shows like The Crown or Stranger Things, the character speaks in Thai, not in English. In the
okay.
case of The Crown, they are very highly formalized kind of Thai speaking. But I thought that's a very good way for me to force myself to listen to Thai, wrestle with the complex tonal system and the kind of the sound that most English speakers would not be able to comprehend. I just get used to the rhythm of the sound system. And I also use Google Translate a lot. I would try to mimic what I hear in a TV show and speak it into Google Translate to see if it gives me the same English translation so that I can tell that my pronunciation is relatively close to what it should be. Those are some of the methods.
Okay. So that's pretty good. Because people do talk about that as a methodology, and just swapping, your Facebook interface into a specific language, or in your particular case, Netflix. I didn't realize that there was so much Thai language dub content available on Netflix. But there are many people who do this for Japanese, for example, with anime in Japanese. But this is quite a passive language learning. Do you find that you live in San Francisco? Do you find you have much opportunity to speak to Thai people?
I definitely had the opportunity to go to my neighborhood Thai restaurant and try to practice speaking Thai to the waiters and the waitresses. Definitely, yes, yeah, and I would venture to say that it's not exactly just listening only. I put a lot of effort into mimicking and reproducing what I hear. And also, I'm now trying to wrestle with the complexity of the writing system itself. So I hope that the next time I go back to Bangkok, to Thailand, I hope that my Thai is good enough that I could crack jokes and maybe speak at a much more interesting level than just survival level.
Because it's still quite an impressive pace to pick up language skills. So I mean, of course, you as an experienced sort of translator and language teacher, like you would have that advantage. But um, nevertheless, you spend quite a bit of time preparing for your Thai language skills for your trip, and you rapidly discover that you're probably going to get a little bit further with your Burmese language skills. So how exactly did that realization dawn on you?
Well, the first instant that realization came to me was when I landed in Mae Sot airport and walked out to the tarmac. And then I saw that the departure gate and the exit gate and the check-in counters were actually marked in English, Thai, and Burmese. And it was quite shocking to me because outside Burma itself, my homeland, the place where I was born, outside Burma itself, I didn't expect that you would actually see Burmese language officially splattered on the wall of an institution like that, or um, a building like an airport. But there was Burmese letters welcoming me, and that was the first encounter, and it gave me a hint that Mae Sot probably was in character much more Burmese than I could expect it to be. And sure enough, when I went around town, it reminded me a lot about some outskirts of Mandalay and things like that. I mean, it's a border town, so it doesn't have the same conveniences and luxuries that Bangkok would offer. But nevertheless, it has a thriving Burmese refugee community, and it has Burmese style tea shop where I could um, I could satisfy my nostalgia for home. And I have a feeling that many Burmese refugees go to these tea shops for the same reason too. So very quickly, when I checked into my hotel, I found out that my receptionist actually couldn't understand my Thai, but could understand my Burmese. And when I walked to the tea shop, obviously, of course, I could speak in Burmese by default and be understood. I don't actually have to switch to Thai. Um, Even some of the Thai people that I encountered in Mae Sot, in Chiang Mai, some of them actually spoke broken Burmese to me. It seems like by proximity, by being close to Burmese refugee population, they have picked up some Burmese language skills.
Interesting. That's actually quite surprising. So this is going in two ways. Then the question being, how linguistically, at least for now, how is the Burmese migrant population adapting to the Thai language? But then also, how is the native Thai population adapting to the Burmese language? So it sounds that the Thai are not necessarily opposed to learning some Burmese. Is this, I don't know, like what, how widespread would you say that is?
I'm not sure how fluent the local Thai population is in speaking Burmese, but I get the feeling that just by working closely with the Burmese refugee population, they have picked up some basic level Burmese. I've seen this happen, of course, in the US as well. People who work with the migrant Mexican population will, over time, pick up basic Spanish speaking skills. There's no question about that. So I can see the same thing happening. But what is perhaps alarming to me is the Burmese refugee population's um, resistance to it learning Thai. And I have a feeling there are a couple of factors contributing to it. One is that they don't look at Thai culture the same way they would look at, say, Korean, that they admire because they like K-pop and the K-pop bands like BTS, and they don't look at Thai culture the way they might look at Jap- Japanese because it's full of anime and kawaii culture and things like that that inspire them to want to learn the language. But they look at Thai as a place where, for the refugees, I mean, a place where they are very likely to be taken advantage of by some of the not so kind or sympathetic bosses and employers, and by the authorities like corrupt policemen who would ask for protection fees monthly so that they are allowed to stay hassle free and things like that. So they don't have a good experience. I had a good experience as an American tourist, but they obviously didn't as refugees in Thailand. So as a result, many of them don't feel inspired to learn the Thai language. And I think in the long run, that's very concerning because I have a feeling that if you have a large population of refugees that don't make an effort to learn the language, it could foster resentment among the local population, looking at that as your lack of desire to integrate and adapt. And for another practical reason, you won't have access to some of the social services. You won't be able to establish social bonds with local people who could help you if you don't speak the language. So that to me is an, an not so comforting dichotomy that I see. That local Thais are actually starting to pick up Burmese, but the local Burmese refugee population is very resistant to learning Thai.
So, okay, but you talk about Korean and you talk about Japanese, and I wonder specifically with regards to Japanese, because Japan, to my knowledge, is the largest donor of scholarship opportunities to Myanmar youth. And my understanding is that the Japanese have, in lieu of actually apologizing for their rampant and prolific crimes in the Second World War, have opted to quietly invest in infrastructure and development and education opportunities for the countries that they victimized, and that therefore there are many Myanmar people, particularly among the youth, who aspire to go to Japan and therefore aspire to learn Japanese because it seems like a more viable option for them, something that they might actually qualify for, and something that comes with, you know, a country where salaries are significantly higher. Do you think that there's a role being played here by the historical interactions between countries like Japan, who have historically post World War II been benefactors to Myanmar, versus, let's say, Thailand, which, although historically much closer, culturally much closer, seems to resent the Burmese. There's a long history of conflict there, and the Thai government seems to be quite close to the Burmese military high command. Is that playing a role here, as well as just the prevalent sort of pop culture?
There is definitely an image among the young Burmese people that the Japanese are the good guys. And for very good reason, too, because many of these young people were born long after Second World War, so they would not even remember the atrocities that the Japanese Imperial Army committed in uh, in Burma and across Asia. History is now just a long distant memory, something that they read about in history books, but they had never personally experienced. Like my parents' generation, who actually had to live through um, Japanese the Japanese occupation era, short-lived, but nevertheless a very brutal and cruel occupation era. Um, but for the young people, Japan is nothing but a country that introduce kimonos and animes. And in Yangon, there are several Japanese culture centers. There are organizations that uh, works towards the PR image of Japan, so that you have a good feeling. It fosters goodwill towards Japan. So I think what you're saying is right. The young people have a different view of Japan, and they look at it as a country that is helping Burma develop. It's not just an image, though. I have to give Japan credit also for the fact that they do invest in tangible infrastructure projects, and the Japanese ambassador, I've heard him speak Burmese in several news reports, and it's impressive. It's impressive that he is able to speak Burmese at that level. So, all of those contribute to having a warm and fuzzy feelings towards Japan. On the other hand, Thailand, people don't look at Thailand the same way. I think you're also right about the fact that many of the people suspect that the Thai military and the Burmese military have close collaboration in many areas. Even though if we talk about the degree of atrocity that the two institutions are willing to commit, I would say Burma is a completely different level, whereas Thai military, even though it's corrupt and even though it will likely use unscrupulous means to um, influence political systems, they still show a lot more restraint in comparison to the Burmese military.
Oh, absolutely. Um, yeah, I mean that's a bit of an understatement, but there is, I think, nevertheless, this connection. Even after the coup happened, we saw the Thai military still sort of welcoming, you know, lying across the border and to mutual meetings. We've seen Thailand with the Track 1.5 dialogue that they created, and I know I'm going to be very cynical here, but Essentially, Thailand is running interference and is offering a platform for Myanmar to interact with regional powers, including China, including India, circumventing ASEAN's wishes and circumventing the 5 point consensus. So there seems to be a lot of collusion, if we can use the word collusion, between the two. Let's look at the practicalities here. Like, how does that impact the lives of Myanmar people who are living in Thailand across the border?
Some of the refugees and the activist type who have fled to Mae Sot and Chiang Mai, the way they spoke to me was that you have different level of mobility, and you almost have to buy these kind of mobilities. For example, if you arrive without anything for any kind of legal documents, you will likely have to pay a monthly kind of fee to the local police so that you won't get deported. And then if you want a next level of mobility, then you will likely have to work your way towards getting something that is called the pink card, something that gives you um, the identity as a registered immigrant worker who is allowed to work in certain um, menial labor industry and things like that. So all of these are heavy burdens. To us, they may be like, what's a big deal if you have to pay 300 baht or 500 baht a month to the local police so that you won't get into trouble as an immigrant. Those to an American would probably be less than the cost of an average lunch that we would go out and have every day. But for refugees who have arrived in Thailand without anything, any document, and who is going to have a lot of trouble getting good paying jobs, that's a heavy burden. Some of the refugees that I met told me that they have heard about people who have committed suicide, or they have heard about people who simply get sick because they struggle and work too hard in order to pay these fees just to be able to survive in Thailand. So all of these creates an environment where the refugees don't really feel like in Thailand or in Thai government they have a partner that they can rely on to protect them and give them safe shelter.
Absolutely. So there's this division between the documented and the undocumented. Um, we I know from personal contacts, you've got people who are enrolling in courses of study, like a minimal course load that they sort of attend pro forma, but it's just so that they can have a student visa because the student visa is the most available visa to them. You've got people who are on a student visa but never attend classes. They just sort of pay off the school. You've got people who are there on a legitimate visa, and you've got a lot of people who have either come in on a visa that has lapsed or simply crossed into places like Mae Sot with no documentation whatsoever because that is the nature of warfare. Um, what is what is the sense among these people? Because what I'm hearing is that there is just this perpetual fear that you are going to be arrested, sent back to Myanmar, and handed over to military authorities to face whatever punishment. Is that what's going on?
That there are different levels of fear. I think one of the activists told me that well, if you get caught trying to cross over, so to speak, and essentially it's a river. It's a narrow river that separates Mae Sot from Myawaddy, the Burmese side. There is a river called Moei River in local language, and in Burmese it'll be called Thao Nyen River, Thao Nyen Mye. It's a river that really, I went there and visited that, and if you stack two small boats lengthwise, you could probably form a bridge long enough to just walk across it. So that's how narrow it is. At some point, I was even tempted to call it a stream rather than a river. Um, but if you are able to cross, and that's certainly the experience with many of the refugees crossing the river or crossing that little thin strip of the land to get there. You sort of race across a football field like dry area in some good weather day, either really early in the morning or really late at night under the cover of the darkness in pitch black conditions. And if you don't get caught, then you would hopefully end up with some sort of refuge NGO or refugee camp organizers that help you with your resettlement. But if you do get caught, they say you would be tossed back. In Burmese, the verb that the person uses, toncha. Toncha is a verb that you would use to describe throwing out garbage or emptying the content of a bucket into somewhere. So, and when I ask them what it means to be tossed back or to be toncha, that means that the Thai authorities will take you to a relatively safe place, away from the battle zone, away from the places where fighting is going on, and then leave you on the Burmese side there so that you can find your way back there. Um, but if you're a hot property, like if you're a well-known entity in the resistance movement or things like that, you may actually get handed over to the other side, to the authorities, because there is pressure from the Burmese junta. As like you said, there is a lot of collaboration or collusion going on there, however you might want to characterize this. So there is an there is an element of fear that undercuts their daily lives. But maybe to say that it's a constant state of fear might be a little bit too much. But for some people that have no money to pay for um, protection and no money to pay the local authorities to leave them alone, that probably is true.
So, well, okay, so let's sort of go through the process here then, because there are people who have at least a little bit of money who can organize a visa in advance. I mean, it's ASEAN, so you get the 2 weeks automatically, visa free travel. But let's say you go ahead of time, you can organize a bit of a visa, you land in Bangkok or you land in Chiang Mai. That's one option. But if you've just crossed that river, you're a refugee, maybe you're Bama, maybe you're Kayin, Kaya, whatever, Shan, Kachin, you find yourself in Mae Sot. There are a lot of Burmese people around you, but you don't have any documentation. You don't have any money. You don't know where you're going to sleep tonight. What are your next steps?
So I've heard stories of refugees who have arrived without any kind of document or things like that just by crossing over. And then after that, they would somehow try to figure out a way to get their passport back, the physical passport. And that probably happens with friends who could legitimately and legally come to Mae Sot or Chiang Mai who would bring them their passport. And then they have one passport. So that gives them another level of mobility so they can start to travel with that passport. If you don't have that ability to do that, then of course you apply for something called a pink card. A pink card is something that in theory is given to people who are allowed and registered to work in certain areas like agriculture or craft or things like that. But in reality, you also are able to bribe your way into getting that kind of status. So, and if you get that, then you're less likely to be stopped when you're stopped on the street and questioned. You're less likely to be sent back. That gives you much more mobility because now you can say that within a particular city, within a particular district or province, you are registered as a worker who is working in this kind of environment, whatever your document might say. In reality, though, I found out that many of them don't actually work this way. It's just either you find a kind employer who is willing to sponsor you this way, or some employers who will sponsor you so that you can get this pink card for a certain fee for themselves. So that way, even though you may be registered as somebody who is working in a farm in Thailand, you may actually be doing something else, and you are able to move around. And if your employer gives you some sort of testimony or document stating that yes, you have an urgent need to travel to some district, some city, maybe let's say Bangkok, for work-related reason, then you can even go as far as Bangkok. So you get another level of mobility. I've also met people who, because when I went to Mae Sot and Chiang Mai, I posted on Facebook that I'm already here. I'm going to be hanging out at this particular cafe from this time and this time. So if you'd like to meet me, please stop by. And some of them actually messaged me and says, I really want to come and meet you in person, but I cannot because I don't have a police card. Which isn't really a physical card, by the way. It's a word that suggests that they haven't paid the required fee in order for the police to leave them alone. So if they go out and about in town and they get stopped, they would likely get into trouble that they cannot get out of. So they cannot come see me. I've also seen people who say like that. So there are definitely different layers of mobility, different layers of legality that you can work towards, but each layer requires a significant amount of time, money to get there. So if you're a refugee, it's really, really difficult to even get to the basic level and move beyond that.
So it sounds like it's a very corrupted system at the end of the day, where the paperwork theoretically and notionally exists, but money is sort of what
Grease
makes
the
everything
wheels.
move. Yeah,
Yes,
but
that's true.
but so from the perspective of the Burmese, though, right? Like this is something that, like, let's be honest, Myanmar kind of works the same way. Is this familiar to the refugees? Are they sort of okay? We'll accept this.
It's definitely familiar to the Burmese culture in the sense in Burmese culture, many of the officials that you encounter, from the traffic police to the bureaucrats in the immigration office, will likely ask you for lapaye bo, literally tea money. They'll ask you tea money, and then you understand that that is a prerequisite for getting done things. So it is a familiar feature of interacting with authorities for sure. Um, but on the other hand, I have mixed feelings about this system of corruption. You have this system of corruption that takes advantage of a vulnerable population, which is very bad and evil, of course. But the systems of corruption also gives a certain amount of protection towards the people who would otherwise be forced back across the border to certain death. I don't think I don't think if you're a Burmese refugee, you appreciate the fact that you're put between two two very painful choices. Either stay on the Burma side and face fear and possible death, arrest and torture and death, or come to Thailand side and deal with a corrupt system that gives you mobility only if you are uh, able to afford to pay for it. So I think there is a lot of resentment, I'm sure, among the Burmese refugee populations, that they are forced to make these two difficult choices. And obviously they will choose for survival's sake going into Thailand. But still, it's a very difficult choice for them.
I mean, absolutely, and they're really sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Correct.
So it's quite an awful situation. But for better or for worse, they are now in Thailand, and Mae Sot, it's a border town. It is a border town. The population is around 50,000. Um, how how long back does the Burmese influence in Mae Sot extend? Is that a post-coup phenomenon, or was Mae Sot already pretty heavily Burmese influenced prior to that?
even prior to coup, I've heard of Burmese people spoke of Mae Sot as a easy place to get to and resettle. And I think the population data suggests that even beginning in 1988, Mae Sot's population was starting to accumulate Burmese refugees and Burmese immigrants. But one of the post-coup phenomenon, perhaps, is that the some of the prominent members of the inner circles of the NUG um, are now based in Mae Sot. So Mae Sot has now sort of become the hub of operation for many of the NUG officials who need to work closely with the refugee population for humanitarian reasons and to support members of the civil disobedience movement, things like that. I mean, physically, it's across the border from Burma. So it makes sense that um, if you are in an organization, whether you are an NGO or whether you are part of the opposition government in exile that is working towards the welfare of your people, that's the next best thing because operating inside Burma would be nearly impossible under the current situation. That to me is a post-coup phenomenon.
Okay. And so, how do the Thai people in Mae Sot feel about this sort of influx in Burmanization of Mae Sot? And not just that, but presumably, if as you're saying, like the National Unity Government has a lot of people operating out of there, that would probably bring quite a lot of negative political attention to them as well. Is there resentment?
I don't have enough. I don't have enough insights into the local Thai population method to be able to assess how their attitude towards the NUG's presence there or the growing population there. But it does give me a concern. It does give me a concern. It concerns me that if the local refugee population aren't able to integrate uh, well with the local Thai population, over time that is going to have simmering resentment. We've seen this happen with the Rohingya population who have fled into different regions of Asia. Um, so there are precedents there of what could happen, and I don't want to see that happen to the Burmese refugees.
Absolutely. And so, how then is the Burmese population feeling about their, let's say, their host culture? Obviously we're talking about how they feel about the government and the possibility of being sent back and the corruption that they have to deal with, but more in the sort of day-to-day, being aware of the fact that they're living in a Thai region with Thai language and Thai culture. How are they sort of relating to that?
Well, they look at Thailand as a stepping stone. But that is not to say everybody has the same attitude, but of course, many of the activist type and the dissidents and the refugees that I met and spoke to there talk about Thailand as a place it was a temporary stop for them. Their hope is that in the best case scenario, in about 2 to 3 years, Burma will become Burma would be put back on the path to democracy again, and then they would be able to go back home to Yangon or Mandalay and be reunited with their family. The other hope is that maybe through a refugee transition kind of agency, they would end up being placed in a more desirable destination like US, Canada, Japan, or Korea. Um, so if that's the way they see Thailand, then there's less incentive to integrate to the Thai culture or learn the Thai language.
Interesting. But so here's the other question for me is the investment, because I've been abroad and working while trying to acquire sort of language skills. Now, for me, as a Westerner, this experience is generally going to be the easy mode version of that. There is no country that I'm going to go to, and no situation that I'm going to be in where I don't have a lifeline. But if you're Burmese, you fled warfare, you maybe don't even have proper documentation. Is it feasible, do you think, to undertake to actively learn Thai and to try to integrate with the Thai culture while also focusing on survival?
That's a really good question. For me, I think I have a fascination with language, and I also
Mm,
have the luxury of learning it from the comfort of my U.S. home in San Francisco, where I have access to things like Netflix, streaming services with Thai audio that I can listen to, or Google high-speed internet and YouTube, where I could find free Thai lessons and things like that. I have a lot of those resources that the typical Burmese refugees in Thai don't have. So, in a way, learning Thai is easier for me. I also have the advantage of being a language instructor. So, I know how to deconstruct a sentence and put it back together and then use that as the model to construct my own other sentences that I need to say things. So, in that sense, I have an advantage as well. But I think it is possible. It's I say this because I've seen that the local Thai population is picking up Burmese speaking skills just by rubbing off the Burmese refugees that they work with closely. So I don't see why the reverse cannot happen, where the local Burmese refugees could also pick up Thai speaking skills. And also, I notice learning centers like Joy House, for example. Joy House is located in Mae Sot and is a place where I went there and gave a talk on Burmese poetry translation and what's involved in translating Burmese poetry into English. It was very well received. But what I wanted to say about groups like Joy House is that they offer, among other things, basic Thai speaking skills, languages and workshop skills. And those I think are very important uh, because if you're a refugee, an adult refugee, you probably aren't able to just go enroll in a Thai school to further your education. So most likely places like Joy House and places like other places run by the NGOs that offer these kind of language services would be your resource for learning Thai language. So for those who do want to, those who see the advantage of further integration, particularly linguistically, I think I would encourage them to take advantage of these language classes offered by groups like Joy House and other NGOs based in Mae Sot and Chiang Mai.
and it's definitely a good thing that these places exist. Are these? I assume these are non-profit entities.
These are non-profit, at least in the case of Joy House,
Mm,
it's non-profit and it's funded by donors.
mhm.
And I know the founder, Jeannie Marie Hallacy, who is a documentary filmmaker who's based in San Francisco, but spent nearly half of her time in Thailand every year.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So it's good that that exists.
yes.
I know from one contact who's trying to learn sort of Thai while working in Chiang Mai, but she's working in a Burmese and English work environment, and so the need for Thai is reasonably limited insofar as her day to day life is concerned, and this is kind of that other factor that comes into it. Like, migrant communities historically have naturally gravitated towards one another for the sense of familiarity and community and ease of communication. Is this leading to, in your opinion, a sort of isolation or a Burmese bubble within Chiang Mai and within Mae Sot, where Thai language just is not seen as all that necessary for your day to day operations?
It's definitely is a vicious cycle. You don't want to make an effort to learn the language, so you stay close to your Burmese speaking community. And then because you're surrounded by Burmese speaking people in that Burmese speaking community, you're less likely to come in contact with Thai language, so you don't feel the need to learn it. I've seen the same thing happen with the overseas Burmese activist community in San Francisco. Many of them arrived after 1988 uprising
Mm.
and they ended up here. But many of them also lived their life in such a way, in a way they remind me a lot about the current Thailand-based, Mae Sot-based, Chiang Mai-based refugees. They live their life in US. They live their life in such a way so that whenever the military regime folded and a democratic government came to power, they could just pack up and go back home and reboot their Burmese life that they left behind, so to speak. But little did they know, between 88 to 2011, when the transition period began, they had spent a good chunk of their life in America without making significant effort to learn the language. So as a result, they are not able to get into good jobs, good positions that
Mm.
requires professional English speaking and writing skills. And now when they try to help the ongoing resistance movement from overseas, they can't really do effective lobbying, for example. They can't really go in front of um, a, uh, a, a politician, a senator, and speak about Burma, even if they are lucky enough to get a chance to meet with them, because they don't have the required English skills. I don't see that kind of mistake happen with the Thai-based refugee population. But I see that there are fertile grounds and environment, um, the sort of like an insulated community that is thriving in its own way, but also limiting in many
Mm.
ways.
Although that being said, I think there's a very interesting distinction to be drawn. You're talking about people who migrated to the United States in '88, and I mean that was over 30 years ago. Um, and you're talking about the limitations when it comes to talking to government figures and getting these high value jobs. The question that obviously comes then is the Myanmar refugees living in Mae Sot. Um, do they actually have any chance of rising to a position where they could theoretically be working in a higher uh, Thai job in a company where Thai is the language of operation? Do they have in their future the prospect of addressing high-ranking Thai government officials, or is it more just this idea that, well, we'll never be Thai citizens, will never be accepted here, will never be given opportunities by large and important Thai companies, will never be listened to by the Thai government. So why aspire to have the language skills to match those circumstances if they're never going to happen for us?
The little bit that I know, and I don't know much, I have to admit, about the collaboration between the current military junta in Burma and the Thai government here, uh, the little bit of things that I know suggest that at least both wants a way to a way to control and contain the Burmese refugee population that is in Thailand. And I think even though within that corrupt system, there are actually level of legitimacy that you can get to where you can aspire to start to work for Thai Thai companies and Thai employers who are probably much more sympathetic towards you and will treat you better. Um, and I say that because in Bangkok, when I was going around, I also met um, Thai people who employ Burmese refugees, and they speak of their employees in a much more understanding and sympathetic fashion, not as low labor workers that we can just take advantage of. And maybe I say that because I'm an optimist as well. So I'm hopeful that even though the system is actually stacked against you, um, it's not impossible to get to that level, I think.
Okay. So so that then opens up the other thing because Southeast Asian citizenship laws are very different for people who are Western. There's a very different concept of citizenship, and on a more personal level, this is one of the reasons that it really riles me up when someone inevitably writes, the 170th article decrying the fact that white people in Asia are referred to as expats, but Asians in Western countries are referred to as immigrants. And the fundamental factor is that in Western countries, we typically have um, a naturalization process. Many Western countries have a doctrine that is called jus soli. So if you're born in that country, you gain citizenship by virtue of having been born there. The United States is a very famous example of jus soli. Whereas a lot of Southeast Asian citizenship laws tend to be very strongly based on jus sanguinis, meaning that you have to have citizenship inherited from your parents. And even the concept of jus matrimonii, so citizenship acquired through marriage, is often quite lengthy and difficult and complicated. Thailand, to my knowledge, is much the same in this regard. Do the Burmese people living in Thailand have any legal option to become citizens? Is that on the cards?
I think in that sense, Thailand operates similar to the way Burmese citizenship laws operates
Yeah.
as well, in the way that, for example, if you're not Japanese, it would be very difficult for you to become
Yeah.
Japanese. You could become a naturalized Japanese citizen, but it's a long and lengthy process, and they're very selective about who is permitted to enter that inner sanctum. You're right that in many Asian countries operates with the assumption that the citizenship is by and large based on your ancestry, not really based on your willingness and your desire to want to live in these countries. But I think many of these countries also offer the chance to live as long-term residents. They do offer, including
Mm.
Burma. Burma does offer long-term residency for, and this is certainly an option uh, that would be open to people who have a lot of money and investment dollars and investment that they can bring to this country. They will be obviously considered as special cases. Um, but that would not be true of refugees, of course.
Mm. Unfortunate reality. But and I know this might call for some conjecture, but do you know whether these, because in the Burmese system, the English translation for it is just permanent residency. Um, and I've seen foreigners who have permanent residency in Myanmar, but I've only seen it once. When I say foreigners, I mean white foreigners. Um, so I don't know how functionally accessible it is to Westerners to gain that status. Um, One would presume that in Thailand it's a little bit easier because I know that the Thai are very interested in retirees from Western countries who have not insignificant retirement savings that will stretch significantly further if they're in Southeast Asia, and that's a very convenient and reliable form of investment. But would this preclude you from certain things? Here in Australia, for example, permanent residency exists, but there are a lot of government positions, for example, that are simply not open to you if you don't have citizenship. Is that discrimination likely to exist in Thailand?
Uh, I don't know enough about the
Mm,
Thai legal system to be able to say this, but I have a
mm,
feeling that, on the other hand, if you are a retiree with a law who wants to stretch the value of your American dollar by retiring in Thailand, maybe you're not really interested in finding a government job. You're much more
yeah, yeah,
interested in visiting Pattaya and lounging around a beach chair and drinking
yeah,
coconut juice, making the best of your time.
yeah. I mean, that is fair enough. But I mean, more from the perspective of the Burmese people there, if they were to aspire to earn that permanent residency, would that open those doors?
I'm not sure.
Hmm.
I can answer that because I don't know enough about the
Mm,
Thai system of immigration and legal laws
mm,
that allows somebody to how far a Burmese immigrant could get to.
yeah. Okay, that's fair enough. And just sort of in general, like not even necessarily looking at the legal aspects of it and your citizenship status. Um, it's the feeling of it, the there's no real other way to put it, like the racism of it. I'm wondering about because I think many of us remember a good couple of years back, before the coup, there was a murder that happened in Thailand, and two Burmese foreign workers were arrested, and they were put on death row. They were, it was a sham trial. Everybody knew that it was a sham trial, and they were found guilty, and they were put on death row, and there were applications for commutation to life sentences from the king and things like this. And the attitude, at least around Yangon, was very much, well, but that's the done thing. Like, if there's a crime in Thailand, you don't want a Thai person to be guilty of it. So you just go arrest some Burmese people and say that they were the ones who are responsible for it. And that's just the way things are done. And I went to Thailand. I was talking to a Thai friend of mine, and she was very sort of hesitant towards the Burmese. And we were talking, and she just, I don't know how we got there, but she turns around. It's like, yeah, but the Burmese. I was saying Buddhism, like, you're both Buddhists. And then she turns out the Burmese are not Buddhist because 300 years ago they invaded us and they burned down this and this temple, and this very strong mentality of no, 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 no. Like, the Burmese are not like us, even though we were across the street from a temple where I could see Buddha next to Ganesh, next to Guan Yin, next to all these other syncretic gods. Like, there seems to be a very negative attitude among the Thai, at least in my experience, towards the Burmese. Is that contributing?
Suddenly, the episode of the fall of Ayutthaya, the fall of Ayutthaya. I'm not an historian, but I think it happened around 1760, something like that, where the Burmese king Simbushin invaded Thailand, and when it put Ayutthaya under a siege, and finally, when the city fell, it essentially razed the city, destroyed many of the fortifications, and forced the top echelon of the Thai people. We're talking about the wealthy merchants and people and the artisans and dancers and artists and things like that to relocate to Burma. And I that must have been a very traumatic experience in Thai history, and Thai people probably remember this bitterly. It's an episode that in Burmese histories, if I remember my high school history days, talked about as one of the glorious moments of Burma overcoming a powerful rival neighbor. But for the Thai people, that probably was as traumatic as, a British colonial occupation or things like that. Because from their perspective, I've seen that they talked about the the regaining of freedom. The king that led the movement that brought Thailand back to independence is a celebrated hero. So I could see the two different attitudes toward that episode. But I'm also hopeful that during this trip, I also met some Thai people who are studying Burmese. Who one of them was kind enough to come to meet me in a cafe and talk to me, and I get the feeling that if she is an example of a more progressive and a more understanding kind of young generation of Thai people, I think they're less likely to hold a grudge against Burma for something that happened hundreds of years ago. But the old-fashioned attitudes that you encountered among some Thai people, I'm sure, still exist too. But because I was able to speak Thai with different cab drivers and people from different layers of the society in Bangkok, I didn't feel like I could pigeonhole the Thai attitude towards Burmese to a single type of attitude. It has different variants, I think, from the best to the worst.
Okay. I mean, that's a more sort of realistic, I think, view of any group and any nation. And
Right.
I find it very interesting that you say that, there are Thai people who are learning Burmese.
Yep.
Um, that's quite surprising to me, because this is Burmese would hardly be a prestige language in the Thai community. Do you happen to know, like, why she was focused on Burmese? Was it just to do refugee outreach, or just as interest, or what was it?
For a very common reason that we will start learning language. Usually it happens because you visit the country and you fall in love with the culture and the people.
Mm,
And then you be inspired to learn the language. Uh, Before I went to Thailand, I must say I also didn't think of Thailand as a- the, I thought of it as just as a fun temporary tourist destination. I didn't think that I would be bewitched by the country, by its culture and the people as much as um, I felt it did to me. So now I've got like 6 books on Thai language. I've got children's alphabet books that will allow me to trace Thai characters so that I can master the writing systems. And I have signed up for a podcast where that I happily pay a monthly fee so that I could get exclusive Thai instructional content. So I see that Thai study is becoming a lifelong study for me. And all it took was just a 2 weeks visit to Bangkok and becoming fascinated with the culture and the people that I met. I have no doubt that the same kind of thing could happen to some of the Thai people who have had the opportunity to visit Burma. But of course, the sad truth is under the current situation, being a country that is governed by a brutal military junta that is willing to wage war against its own people. I mean, we're talking about sending airstrikes against village schools that were not doing anything to them. Um, there are less likelihood of foreigners visiting Burma and falling in love with the country and wanting to learn Burmese. It reflects in the enrollment in university Burmese classes like mine, because PhD students cannot go to the country to read stone inscriptions and colonial records in Burma, so they have less of a reason to invest 2 to 3 years of their life to study Burmese. And visitors cannot go experience the beautiful side of Burma because everything they hear is tragic and bloody civil war headlines. So they're less likely to want to pick up Burmese as a study.
although this is sort of tangential, but it's something that, because I agree with you. I agree with you that the focus is not there. And this is coming from multiple directions. I mean, the first direction is that, as you say, people are not as able to go. I do remember when I was in my undergraduate, we had someone from the United States who was visiting Australia, and she had actually done a PhD on Burma. Specifically, she was studying the experiences of educators who had fled over the border post 1988, and the ways in which those educators had been, um, let's say, creatively interpreting the military's edicts with regard to education content to instill critical thinking skills into students through the medium of a curriculum that was designed to crush the ability to think critically and question the government. But she found that while the United States university that she was doing a PhD with would not allow her to go to Myanmar, the Australian university actually would have allowed her. So I don't know whether this is still the case, but it does seem that in some universities in the United States there is has been a strong hesitation to send researchers to Myanmar proper. Um, so I don't know. Her research was in Thailand, but what I find as well, I've just finished my Burmese studies at my university, and I was the only student in my class. Um, the first year class had maybe 3 or 4 students in it this year. And I finished the sort of higher level stuff as the only student. Second year is the only level that they teach too. It's only a 2-year course, and they're talking about potentially coming in with a 3rd-year course. But university administration is very hesitant to spend the money to set up a course because they're very worried about return on investment. But do you not feel that now is a more important time if to learn Burmese?
I like to think so. I like to think so. Because in order to understand the um, the root causes of the long-lasting military rule, or in order to more efficiently help the Burmese refugees who are stuck at the Burmese border, I think researchers, NGO workers, I like to think, would find the need to learn Burmese, a greater need to learn Burmese. Um, uh, but it does eliminate the traveler population that might come in contact with the culture and then fall in love with it and started learning the language. So
Mm.
there is still those NGO workers. There is still the researchers who are not working on archival stuff, but who would like to work with anthropological kind of research that requires speaking directly to your subjects in the border area. I would like to think that those kind of studies, those kind of research will still inspire people to learn Burmese. Because people have talked about the fact that after Russia invaded Ukraine, suddenly there is a rise of interest in a rise of enrollment in university classes, for example, for classes related to both Russian and both Ukraine, history classes and also language classes as well. I like to think. First of all, I wouldn't want this conflict in Burma to prolong any further than it needs to be. But if this if the conflict is ongoing and as a result of that, people like to learn Burmese language, I think it's a very worthwhile pursuit to understand the root causes of the conflict and also to talk to people who are affected by the conflict directly in their own language. That way, you are not going through an interpreter to get the experience, and you get a much more accurate picture of what they went through and the trauma that they went through.
But I would just add to that, although I definitely agree on that point, and even more broadly than that point, just communicating to someone in their own language is such a fundamentally different experience than communicating through a mutual third language or communicating through an app. Again, as a linguist and a polyglot, when someone tells me things like, oh, English is a universal language, there's no point studying other languages anymore, or AI translation technology is getting so good that language learning is sort of pointless. It bothers me because those comments come from people who are so monolingual that they don't understand that there is significantly more than just literal communication going on when two people speak in a given language, and they're missing a wealth of additional information and additional insight into who that person is, by relying on these transitory communication media. But more, I'm thinking, if the projections that we've been receiving are true, and we've had a couple of people come on and have spoken and said that, yeah, approximately 6 months seems to be a realistic time frame for the junta to be at the very least corralled into Naypyidaw, and for us to potentially start seeing a reopening of the country, stabilization even in the large urban centers, and hopefully potentially foreign economic investment back into the country, which is desperately needed. Um, Surely then, just for the ability of foreign governments and foreign companies to be able to establish themselves and distinguish themselves in the new Myanmar, that we all fervently hope is going to be established soon, language skills are kind of something that you need to be focusing on today, so that you are capable of using them tomorrow when the opportunities present themselves to come into the country and interact with the people and interact with the systems and try to do some good.
That,
And
that's true. That's true too. Because in order to reach a certain level of fluency where you can have meaningful conversation and not just asking for the price of a piece of fritter or asking for directions, but actually have meaningful conversation that allows you to build bonds and make social connections and have robust discussions about history and culture and things like that. You have to invest probably about 1 to 3 years, I would think, for a skilled person, maybe 1 to 1.5 year, but for average person, you have to at least invest about 3 years or so. So if our assumption is correct, um, and if your guest projection is correct, then it is a very good time for people who want to work in Burma to start investing time and energy in mastering the language itself. The other thing, like you point out, is for me, when I go to a country, um, putting the time to learn the language is not just for convenience. It's my way of paying homage to the country. And it's also to show that my interest in their culture and their people is not cursory. I'm not somebody who would just go there, have a good time for 2 weeks and then never look back at this country other than just uh, looking back at my trip on Instagram posts and things like that. I want this country, this culture, and this language to become a permanent part of my life. So that's my way of showing that this is my intent. It's my lifelong commitment. That's why I'm learning a language. I'm not just a flyby tourist that will be there and then gone. So if people wants to um, people's interest in Burma is more than cursory, more than temporary, that they have a reason to help Burmese people or work with people in the Burmese culture for a longer time, then language learning is actually a prerequisite, an
mm,
elementary step in it.
absolutely. I mean, it's even goes deeper than that. I think. I know this is a bit straying from our original topic, but I do think it's an important point to make that language doesn't just give you that ability to interact with people and get them to open up in ways that they physically are not capable of through other media or are just not comfortable doing. But additionally, the wealth of back catalog, if you will, content, the literary, the poetic, even movies, the consistent references that people make in their day-to-day communication. If you can speak the language and you can read the language, and you can understand the poetic references and the literary references, these function as a very convenient shorthand for conveying very complicated sets of emotions in response to very complicated sets of circumstances that people who speak the language and live in the language can just sort of quickly convey to one another and nod wisely and say, yes, yes, yeah, we all know that story, and it reminds us of this particular event. But there is no way to translate these, like to attempt to explain these. And in the limited work that I've done trying to contextualize and explain Burmese revolutionary slogans and content, some things have required a page of explanation of speeches that were given 100 years ago, of historical figures, of literary characters, of books, of poetry, of something like this, just to convey a cheap pun that in Burmese was present in about 4 words. Um, so yeah, there's this depth, I think, that is being lost by people who choose not to engage in the language.
Yes, the talk that I gave at Joy House in Mae Sot was related to that. The idea that many monolinguists or people who speak only a single language seems to think that anything you can say in one language could be translated to another language. It's not quite true, because the way the Japanese would, before they eat something, would bow and say "itadakimasu" to
Mm.
pay homage to everything from the creature that gave up its life to make this meal happen, to the farmers that grow the rice, to the cook that make the meal, an expression of thank. If this is not part of your culture, say in English or something like that, then that phrase cannot be translated because it's not part of the construct
Mm.
of the society that give birth to this language. The Burmese phrase "anare," which could be an apology, but also a way to warn you that they're about to impose upon you and ask a favor that they know is going to inconvenience you, but they'll do it anyway. So they preface that with "anare." That kind of phrases cannot be translated because it's very much a part of the culture construct of that. So you first start with language, and then you actually become immersed with the culture, and you get a deeper understanding of the culture itself. In a sense, you become Burmese when you get to that level. You're not only just speaking Burmese, but you're actually thinking and feeling like Burmese, or you're thinking and feeling like Japanese
Mhm.
person. So when you get to that level, then of course you're born with the people, you're born with the culture, and your attitude towards the country and the people also change completely.
It is strange because I find that so much of human communication, day to day human communication, is highly formulaic. When we really get down to it, like I think those of us who have studied languages, we probably have memories of sitting in classrooms and reading the script of, hello, good day, I would like this, how much does it cost, and so on. But at the end of the day, when it gets down to it, those scripts are actually quite close to what a real life interaction is with a vendor or customer service or someone who works in these capacities. But what is surprising is the way in which these formulae change. Like studying Persian, when someone asks you how you are, the correct answer to that is thank you. You don't actually tell someone how you are because they don't care. You just thank them for expressing interest in how you are, and then you move on.
Right,
Yeah, it was very like you could say like how you are, but then that would be different, right? Like if someone asks you, "Hone shoma chetore," they're asking like, "What is your status? What is your condition?" It's quite a formal way of asking. Or you could say like "Holet," for example, is more casual. Like, "Oh, holet chetore." You would generally just say "Mochakaram," so thank you. But if someone says "Khubi," are you okay? Are you well? Then you would be more likely to respond "Khubam," I'm well. So it's the question cues you into what the expected response is, and you have to learn like it's a call and response in the way that in Burmese, "Sabi bila," like no one cares whether or not you've actually physically eaten. The question is not about your dietary habits. It's more just a courtesy question, and it's a very, at least in my experience, is quite a pan Asian thing, asking people whether they've eaten
right.
as part of greeting.
Yeah, that's
You know,
true. That's true. Yeah. One of the common mistakes that language learners often make, and maybe it's not a mistake if you're learning languages that are closely related in cultures that are closely related, like
mm,
English and Spanish and French, for example. But if somebody come to me with a list of English sentences that are commonly spoken, and they said, I learned to learn how to say all of these in Burmese, and they'll come up with some phrases like good morning and good evening, which Burmese people don't say, by the way.
mm,
I could literally translate it into "Kaungdong Manek Kimba," a morning that is great, "Kaungdong Nyane Gimba," an evening that is great. But you'll be laughed at it if you say that because you won't
yeah,
sound Burmese. So the more reasonable question is, what do Burmese people say to each other in the morning? And then learn that phrase to be much more Burmese. That's the right attitude towards it. Sometimes, if you're not a linguist, or if you're not a learner who have learned a language that is vastly different from your mother
mm,
tongue and your native culture, you make these kind of mistakes. And it's good to know that Burmese language or Thai language for English speakers is a completely different specimen of language from a different culture. And it's more important to get the undertones of the culture um, rather than just to get the literal translation of what you want to say.
Absolutely. And I find, like, now that you've said, someone might ask, how do you say good morning and good evening? It just occurred to me, like, I've never even tried to say that in Burmese. I've never, because
Right.
no one's ever said that to me.
Yeah.
It wouldn't make sense. Um, and so, yeah, like if I went into it completely sort of fresh, I'd be like, because the Chinese, for example, do,
Yes.
早上好 and all these sorts of things. So you do have phrases in Chinese for that. So people might reasonably assume, well, as a general rule, Asian languages do. Yeah, that's not how this works. Like everyone is different. Everyone does it their own way, and
Correct.
that's
Correct.
the Thai thing as well. Like that's the other thing. Like you go to Thailand, you see Thai people, and they're always, they're very heavy on the Anjali Mudra, putting the hands together, gesture. Very rare in Burma.
That's right. Very rare in Burma, exactly. And the same thing with Thai too, because if you could say good morning if you want, you can say arusawat, but that doesn't sound Thai at all. More
Mm.
likely they'll just say sapai mai, sawadi kap, or sawadi ka, and that would be it. And it's much more natural if you speak that way rather than try to literally translate what you would say in the morning and say it to a Thai person.
And I found that even you go to Lao, and I think a lot of languages, particularly Asian languages, where levels of formality and politeness are so important, you often find that there are regions where magically this evaporates. So in Korea, my understanding is if you go down to Jeju Island, the population is so small that a very strictly hierarchical language is just not functional. And the thing with Thai, adding these politeness markers, like hap at the end, like when I was in Laos, people like that doesn't exist here, right? That there aren't enough people in Laos for that to have significance. So it's just sabaidi. It's not sabaidi hap. You would just sound like a Thai tourist if you did that. Sabaidi, and that's it.
Right. Yeah. It has to do with the fact that what society agree on as the politeness marker, or what the society agree on as a mode of speaking that is considered acceptable. If you
Mm.
deviate from that, even though your intent might be to be polite, it may no longer serve that purpose anymore. So that's the fascinating thing about language.
And again, it is back in the Burmese context. I do find it a little bit. It's a little bit tricky to make it sound natural, um, because what determines what words am I allowed to use with what person? Um, can you use min? Can you use nin? Or do you have to use kamya? Kamya sounds a little bit very formal to me. And so I would naturally think, well, if I'm talking to, a taxi driver, if I'm talking to a server in a restaurant or something, well, the word would be like min. And I've had Burmese friends of mine, tell me off and saying like that was not an appropriate pronoun to use for someone who is not a personal friend of yours. I'm like, yeah, but he's not my employer, so kamya does not sound natural in this. Like, what would I do? And they're just like, well, just don't use a pronoun in that sentence at all. It wasn't necessary anyway. It's like, but I'm a European. Like, I need a subject in my sentence. I need something. So it's hard to make it natural.
That's true. That's true. The Burmese will either, in the cases you mentioned, the Burmese will either skip the pronoun or they will use a kinship term. Like if you are speaking to
Mm.
your waiter who is relatively younger, you call him Nile, little brother, or a girl who is relatively younger, you call him Nyama, little sister. Or if you know their name, you use their name as a substitute pronoun, and those would be considered a much more polite options than calling somebody kamya or me, which could come across as confrontational if you do it quite often.
Which again, that's such an odd thing, because pronouns in Western languages tend to be sort of reasonably closed class. It's like this is the set of pronouns, you learn them and you apply them across the board. with, sometimes minimal distinction between formal and informal pronouns. But
Yep.
then you go to Asia, where it's like a pronoun is any noun that, for whatever communally agreed upon reason, can stand in place of the name of a person. And yeah, as you said, kinship terms or even titles, like Saya as teacher could just
That's right.
function as a pronoun.
It is a pronoun. That's right. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And even a personal, like a first person pronoun, like my Burmese teacher would often refer to herself as Sayama when speaking
Yes,
Burmese,
correct.
which I
Yes,
found so strange. Like, we
correct.
have Jano and Jama. Like, why are you not using the words? But no, you use the title.
For some reason, the sentiment that you get, particularly in the case of women in Burmese, when they refer to themselves, in English, we call it as referring to yourself as a third person,
Mm,
which would be a very pretentious thing to do. But in
yes.
Burmese, actually, it is considered a softer, a more sensitive way of speaking about yourself without thrusting the nga or chano or chama, which is a very egotistical way of saying in Burmese view.
Which, yeah, so it's the complete opposite. And so it's
Correct.
getting that mental habit of thinking of these things as appropriate ways of communicating. Like, I myself have a lot of difficulty even using ba. I don't include it in most of my sentences because it feels unnecessary. And then I find that there are some sentences where I'm being told, even if it weren't for politeness factors, just for euphonic factors, the sentence sounds incomplete without a syllable hanging at the end. So it's just nicer to throw ba in to make it sound complete and balanced.
Well, that's right. That's right. Especially if your sentence is ending with a noun. Um,
Mm,
it sounds very abrupt if you say da yango myo. This is yango. But it
mm.
sounds much more natural and it flows nicer and softer if you say da yango myo ba. This is yango. Small things like that. Those are things that you picked up if you do what I do, like start to um, listen to the content
Mm.
of the language you want to learn, switch your primary language in Netflix to what you want to learn. And you start to pick up these things that are not in the textbook. So those are the things that you acquire through imitation and mimicry, and you can't really learn that.
And yet, but the only issue here is when it comes to Burmese language itself, the content for Burmese language is quite limited. At least I found it to be quite limited. There's a lot of media content being created, Burmese journalism and so on. But beyond that, if I wanted to take media that I'm already familiar with and have it presented to me in a Burmese version, I find it's very difficult to find that.
It's true.
Mm.
You don't have the option, for example, to change the Netflix audio
Yeah.
to Burmese for default. You can do that with Japanese or Thai, for example,
Mm.
and you don't have a lot of subtitle, good quality Burmese movies that you can access to. Um, but there is a growing list of content creators, I must say, on both Facebook and on YouTube. We're talking about travel vloggers and or the walk and talk kind of people who would walk along a particular Burmese location and introduce you things that he or she encounters. Those are very good for language learners because you're looking at it in context. You're looking at things in context and hearing the word, which allows you to put things together and understand what they're talking about.
But it kind of, bringing it back to the Thai people who are picking up Burmese, to me that's actually quite impressive, because I can't imagine that those Thai people would have many options, especially living in Thailand, to undertake any sort of formal education in Burmese. They wouldn't have, I presume, access to Thai language materials that are designed for Burmese learning. So they would have to be picking a lot of things up just by trial and error, and picking it up passively, listening to how the Burmese around them are communicating. And when I hear that, like, I feel ashamed, because I spent 3 years in Yangon, and I spent most of that time in an English speaking bubble, and my Burmese is quite weak as a result of that. So I'm quite surprised that the Thai are finding it that easy, or some of them at least are finding it that easy to pick up Burmese.
Well, I also had a chance to meet with one of my former classmates who used to be a NLD MP and is now
Mm.
based in Mae Sot. And he said once arriving in Mae Sot, he decided to learn Thai, and he hired a Thai person to teach him Thai. And over the course of a year or so, he never managed to pick up Thai, but his Thai teacher managed to pick up Burmese.
Wow.
So I have to tell you, I think you're in company. You're in good company. Some people pick up languages very easily. Some people, maybe it takes more efforts and concerted efforts and time.
Mm. And yeah, I mean, it's it is a difficult process.
Yes. Yeah.
And speaking from the perspective of both a language teacher and a linguist, like no matter what the language is, no matter how easy the language appears grammatically, phonetically, structurally, no matter how similar it is to your native language, learning to speak a language fluently is always a lengthy process. It is a heavy personal investment in
Yeah.
time and mental effort. And it is something that, although I would argue it is one of the most rewarding and valuable experiences and things that you can invest your time and your effort into, it is nevertheless a very difficult thing to achieve, and it's something to be lauded if anyone undertakes it successfully.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
looking to the future, I'm wondering, like you've been speaking to these people, and you've been speaking to people who are in a very many of them are in a very desperate situation. Even those who are paying their rent, they've got a roof over their heads. They're still in a very uncertain circumstance. In terms of the feeling and the sense that you're getting from them, looking towards the future, looking towards a potentially post-coup, the post-revolution reality, do you anticipate that this large influx into Thailand is going to lead to a shift in Myanmar-Thailand relations on the personal level?
For the better, I hope. I hope. And
Mm,
I'm also hopeful that some of the activists and refugees I met, even though, like you said, they are in desperate situation with uncertain future, they're also turning around and helping people who are less fortunate and helping
mm,
people who arrive fresh off the boat, as it were. Um, because they have had the chance to resettle to some extent, so they are in a position to help. So, for example, one of the activists that I met, a young Burmese activist who used to belong to the Burmese Student Union, who fled to Mae Sot after the coup. Um, she couldn't come to one of the meetings that I had at a tea shop because she was distributing Christmas gift to some of the
wow.
needy people in Thailand. So when I hear stories like that, I have nothing but admiration for them, for the fact that even though they are struggling situation, they find pleasure, they seek reward in selfless acts like that. I think these are the people that in the post-coup federal union kind of democratic kind of Burma that we envision. These are the kind of young people that will lead the nation rebuilding efforts. These are the kind of people that I hope could become bridge that foster goodwills between Thailand and Burma. Because if they go back, um, maybe they retain some fond memories of the good experiences that they've had in Thailand. Or if they continue to stay in Thailand and do something meaningful with their life, maybe they can facilitate the cultural exchanges that could happen between Thai people and Burmese people. So I'm hopeful. I have nothing but admiration for these young people, particularly the young people, because I
Mm,
feel like they have shouldered an unfair burden for this conflict. Many of them within these past 3 years or so have witnessed brutality and torture and suffered losses that we probably could never imagine encountering in our entire lifetimes. But
mm,
despite that, uh, don't get me wrong, they show signs of mental, physical trauma for sure. But there is still also the side of them that I can see that is able to wake up and smile and just take simple pleasure in a cup of Burmese tea and fried donuts at a Burmese tea shop. So I'm hopeful.
Share some final comments now.
I guess based on what we have spoken about today, I think my final thought is that you fall in love with a culture, and then you start learning the language, and then the language leads you to fall in love with the culture more. So it's a double-edged sword, but it's a worthwhile love affair. So I would say it's well worth pursuing.
I know for a lot of podcast listeners, as soon as the fundraising requests start up, you just kind of zone out or skip ahead till it's over. But I ask that if you're taking the time to listen to our full podcast, that you also take the time to consider our spiel. Some may assume that producing a 2-hour episode wouldn't take much more than the conversation itself. But so much more goes into it. In advance of the interview, our content team reviews the biography and relevant works of the upcoming guests, and we discuss the best way to use our limited time together. After the interview is completed, the raw audio file is sent to our sound engineer, who shapes it into working order. A single episode can take several full days of solid production work in the studio, which is carefully coordinated with our content team to ensure smooth listening. Further edits and post-production magic bring the eventual episode into your ears, along with extensive written descriptions of each interview, which we publish on our blog and social media. Many of these steps require an outlay of funds in some way or another. We hope that each episode informs you about the ongoing crisis, and if you find it of value, we also hope that you might consider supporting our mission. If you would like to join in our mission to support those in Myanmar who are being impacted by the military coup, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Your donation will go on to support a wide range of humanitarian and media missions, aiding those local communities who need it most. Donations are directed to such causes as the Civil Disobedience Movement, CDM, families of deceased victims, internally displaced person IDP camps, food for impoverished communities, military defection campaigns, undercover journalists, refugee camps, monasteries and nunneries, education initiatives, the purchasing of protective equipment and medical supplies, COVID relief, and more. We also make sure that our donation fund supports a diverse range of religious and ethnic groups across the country. We invite you to visit our website to learn more about past projects as well as upcoming needs. You can give a general donation or earmark your contribution to a specific activity or project you would like to support, perhaps even something you heard about in this very episode. All of this humanitarian work is carried out by our nonprofit mission, Better Burma. Any donation you give on our Insight Myanmar website is directed towards this fund. Alternatively, you can also visit the Better Burma website, betterburma.org, and donate directly there. In either case, your donation goes to the same cause in both websites except credit card. You can also give via PayPal by going to paypal.me/betterburma. Additionally, we can take donations through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. Simply search Better Burma on each platform and you'll find our account. You can also visit either website for specific links to these respective accounts or email us at info@betterburma.org. That's Better Burma, one word, spelled BETTERBURMA.org. If you would like to give in another way, please contact us. We also invite you to check out our range of handicrafts that are sourced from vulnerable artisan communities across Myanmar, available at alokacrafts.com. Any purchase will not only support these artisan communities, but also our nonprofit's wider mission. That's Aloka Crafts, spelled ALOKACRAFTS, one word, alokacrafts.com. Thank you so much for your kind consideration and support.
ba yaranang kaya unya na dadu ya danan dari gane dadu mana we kada besayana besayo Oba yarananda da yarananga na yaranaya da yaranam boda ba yaranam no boda